Welcome to episode 163 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode is brought to you by our friends at CUIs, the credit union industry's leading talent development solutions provider. After listening to our show, be sure to learn more about TalentNEXT, the conference that takes a laser-focused look at smart people strategies for your CU. Register today at content.cuis.org/talentnext. Today, I am very excited to have a conversation with Tricia Szurgot. Tricia is the CEO of Securityplus Federal Credit Union in Baltimore. And with that, let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Tricia.
Thank you, Randy. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to talk to you. Before I get into one of my first questions that day, doing a little homework, which means I was talking to Jill, but I've got a question for you that I'm excited to ask. But can you give us a little bit of background? Where did the career start, and how did it lead you to where you are today as in credit unions? I guess first and foremost, but as the CEO of the credit union.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for asking this question. It's always a great one. So over the last 33 years, which is hard to even say that number sometimes.
I understand that. Yep.
Over the last 33 years, I've spent about 20 years in the credit union industry. And I started working really right out of high school. I didn't go to college right out of high school. Started answering phones in a call center, and I worked for a collateral protection insurance company, and our clients were banks and credit unions. And I sort of fell in love with the credit union movement. I quickly moved from really just answering phones to being an account manager. And I traveled the whole East Coast, seeing the inner workings of lending departments of banks and credit unions of all different sizes. So it really gave me a unique perspective at a really young age. And after about 7 years doing that, I went to work for one of my client credit unions. And I kind of say the rest is history. Just fell in love with doing good, fell in love with not only the notion of helping people, thrive financially, but also seeing a really interesting and unique career path. So when I started working for my first client credit union, which was Discovery Credit Union out of Pennsylvania, I had a president CEO who really empowered me, and he encouraged me to get my degree. And I was one of the very fortunate people who, through our tuition reimbursement program, I got my bachelor's degree in business, working for a credit union. And then ironically, 20 years later, I got my master's degree working for another credit union.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. So I always like to tell my story, particularly to inspire my employees and to inspire, anybody out there that thinks, oh, I can't afford college, or, I can't do this. You can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
I love that story. And to me, it seems like, over the years of doing this podcast, that like similar stories have happened in the credit union space, where it's like the person who goes from teller to CEO over a career, which I'm not sure how much that happens elsewhere.
It's so true. It's so true. And interestingly, after working in the credit union for about 10 years, I was in my mid-30s or so. My husband and I just got married. We were looking for sort of our next adventure and our life plan. And I got a little bored, if I'm being honest. Yeah. And I really wanted to work globally. I wanted to work in what I perceived as a more complex business environment. So my husband and I moved from our hometown in Pennsylvania to Atlanta, Georgia. He went to work for Georgia Tech teaching, and I took a position as head of global strategy for an engineering firm. And the engineering firm that I worked for, we did a lot of work for the DoD, federal government, technology, and boy, was it more complex, and boy, was it global. And interestingly, that I made that change in 2006. So I happened to be out of the industry during all of the turmoil of 2008.
Yeah. Good timing.
Yes, exactly. Not planned. I did not have a crystal ball, I promise you.
But you got to come back for the pandemic. So, it's
exactly.
It all equals out, right?
Exactly. And, and what I realized, during that time out of the industry, working globally in engineering, and then I worked for a short period of time, about 3 years, for a global technology firm. And being out of the industry, I always missed something. Like, I loved what I was doing. I loved my clients. I loved, just the whole complexity of how business was evolving, but just something was missing. So I always like to say, through, a little bit of, getting to know myself a little bit more, through becoming a parent for the first time in my late 30s, and, just through, understanding what's possible, I made the decision to come back to the credit union industry. And I was a little worried. I was a little worried that being out of the industry, and with so many people spending their entire career, within credit unions, sometimes within the same credit union, would I be accepted? Would my global experience, be valued, or just the opposite? And I was thrilled to see that I was able to come into a credit union that was at the very, very beginning of a complete strategic transformation. And my experience outside of the industry really helped accelerate what we were doing, but it also helped me bring just an incredibly wide perspective to what we were doing. And I always like to say, I feel like I came back to a completely different industry than what I left, because it's so future thinking and so innovative. And it was always collaborative. But I think with technology and more, online collaboration, it's just a completely different industry than what it was. And I'm so excited to be in the position that I'm in.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know who else? A previous guest of the show and friend, Monica Bells in Kauai. She also had that kind of international business background before she found her credit union. So, and I can just say, for people can't see us. So for those that are listening, I happen to be in Africa right now because I was working with Akaska in Botswana last week, and I decided to stick around and tour some since it was a long flight. So there are international opportunities, even in credit unions, to get involved with. But anyways,
fantastic.
Enough about me. Question for you. You mentioned technology. So I'm going to go two directions here. First, what do you see as the biggest challenges that we're facing today as far as credit unions go? And then on the flip side, you mentioned the difference from when you left to when you came back and all the excitement that is going on. What has you most excited currently for credit unions?
Oh, great question. So I think one of the biggest challenges for our industry right now is kind of catching up, first and foremost, catching up. And, there are credit unions that have the scale, to be able to really leverage the latest and greatest technology. There are some credit unions that don't, that are thinking really innovatively and doing some really cool things. Adding on to that, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen really over the last, 6-7 years is balance. How do we, as credit union CEOs, credit union leaders, future thinkers, really balance the need for keeping humans at the center of everything that we're doing with technology? And, even today, with everything that we've been hearing over the last month with ChatGPT.
Absolutely. Can't not talk about it.
Right, exactly. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, ChatGPT. And, I was so excited last week when they came out with the iOS app. It's on my iPhone.
I am with you completely. So
yes.
I've been amazed how in such a short time it's basically replacing Google for me. So
me as well. And, you're just kind of testing, how can we leverage that? How can we use that? And at Securityplus, one one of the challenges that we've really had is, I came into a turnaround situation, and last year we did some amazing things turning our business around, and now we're really focused on transformation. And because of that, I'm really challenging my new executive leadership team to really think differently. And how can we perhaps not take the same path that maybe other credit unions that have gone down this road before us have taken, but how can we really leverage all the tools and all the technology, AI, ChatGPT, to really leapfrog over some of the steps that we've missed, over the last 3, 5, 10 years, to really accelerate the trajectory of what we want to do.
I think you're making an amazing point, and something that I noticed a few years ago in Africa was they didn't have the traditional payment systems that we had. I mean, they had them, but not widely accepted, right? Like credit cards, debit cards, that type of stuff. And they seem to have leapfrogged us when they went with like M-Pesa and things like that, where they just went to the phone.
Yes.
Right. And so what you're saying for the credit union who's been maybe a little slow to adapt or slow in the progress, you don't have to start from square one. You could start from square one today, whatever that looks like in 2023 or next year in 2024. I've got a couple of just questions. You mentioned, you came in kind of a turnaround story. If I'm remembering correctly, you've been there about a year now, a little over?
Yep, a little over 14 months.
So a question while it's still fresh in your mind, the new CEO, what do you wish somebody would have told you now that you're a year in? If they're getting their first CEO gig for the first time?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, as you said, this is my first CEO gig, and I was very fortunate that I came from a role where I was EVP COO, so that, complete enterprise scope of responsibility. Okay. Yep. But the one thing, and it is crystal clear in my mind, what that one thing is that surprised me. And it is the importance of governance. Yes. And, governance is one of the least sexy things, that we talk about, yep. As industry leaders and certainly as CEOs. But, the importance of not only clear governance, but that there's alignment of how governance is used, intended, applied, practiced. And the reason why I say that is because when I walked into Securityplus, we have outstanding governance. We've used the Carver model. And what I realized was that there was somewhat of a disconnect of what was on paper, or digital, of course, and what was actually in practice. And walking in as CEO, my expectation was that I was the one catching up. And I was the one, having to kind of study up and get all my ducks in a row. So I knew exactly what everybody expected. And what I realized was that wasn't the case. It was that, we really needed to kind of go back as a board, as a new CEO, and we needed to really revisit and look at all of the facets of governance to make sure that we were speaking the same language. And what I really, really did over the course of the last 14 months, and I have an amazing board that's been very collaborative in, being receptive to, let's just get together and kind of talk through this. And, one thing that I think, anybody who knows me will say is I'm not afraid of a difficult conversation. And, as CEO, there's always a way to have even the most difficult conversations in a courageous, vulnerable, humble, empathetic way. And when you're learning together as a board and a CEO, those conversations are critical. especially during a time when we were in a turnaround situation. So
yeah, transition, right? So it's so interesting. Two things on that. The one, you're not alone in that. When I've talked to friends of mine who have become CEOs, even if they were in that EVP, SVP position and went to board meetings, they didn't realize how much the CEO and the board chair sometimes in particular, but the board as a whole needed to be in alignment. They were almost shielded from it from their CEO. It's funny that came up. The other question, I guess, that I was thinking about there was your idea of like being able to have the tough conversations. Is that something that you've always possessed, or has that been a learned thing over time?
I would say it's been a learned thing over time. However, I always seem to have the gene of being curious, and say, well, why do we want to do that? Why are we doing it this way?
And that's one of my favorite words in the world. So.
Me as well, and I don't know that I was necessarily as comfortable with those difficult conversations or comfortable challenging the process or even challenging, authority, in the right way until, you kind of have to test it and you have to try it. And, when you take on any type of leadership role, whether you're a first-time manager or a CEO, that's one of the greatest attributes that, anybody aspiring to a leadership role, I think, has to have. And they have to be able to really make it their own. You can't see somebody's way of approaching things and just try to be them. You have to test and you have to, kind of try out different things that work for you. You can't be a bull in a china shop. You're not going to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And building empathy, really understanding what's driving others. And, you touched on it. I touched on it. I truly believe at the cellular level that the time that I spent working internationally, Europe, Asia, etc., it has broadened my, not only my business mindset, but just the overall empathy that I have for the human experience. And I always, say too, I mentioned earlier, I became a mom, a little bit later than most in my late 30s. And I don't know that I realized at the time that being a leader for so many years prior to becoming a parent, being a leader made me a better parent. And being a parent has made me an even better leader.
Better leader, right?
Yes. And I read an article not too long ago. I actually think it was a Humaniday article. I want to say it was Carl Clark. And, he wrote about, and I'm going to completely botch it. So I apologize, Carl, for botching it. But I think it was about parenting out loud.
I remember that one, yeah.
You do? Okay, good. So I got it right. Whew, yeah. Thank goodness.
Well, we might have both got it wrong, but I know the one. We will link to it in the show notes. So
fantastic. And one of the things, as a CEO, and even as, a leader prior to becoming CEO, we're all human beings. We all have to balance work, life, parenting. I'm a sandwich generation where I have an almost 15-year-old son, and I'm also caring for elderly parents.
Yeah.
And there's always something that is coming up. And I'm very lucky. I have an amazing husband who supports everything that I do. But we also have to make sure that we allow our workforces, we create a culture where people can really be themselves. And that empathy, that understanding of we have a business to run, yet we have to make sure that we take care of our people, and we have to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And in many ways, taking care of ourselves means demonstrating what it means to balance work and life. So a little bit of a long and winding road there, to your answer, but I think it's all related.
This is my own curiosity here that I'm going to jump back to, though, because I didn't want to get past this. When I was talking to Jill, and I know you two know each other well, you mentioned humanity. One of the things I had asked her, like when people are coming on the show that she knows better than me, I'm always like, what's interesting about them? And she's like, something you'd find interesting. You're a certified futurist.
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Tell me more. That just sounds fun.
Absolutely. So another great question. So it's something that I'm very proud of. So when I first took my previous role as EVP COO, a lot of the work that I was doing was connecting the past to the future. And while I have an MBA in economics and leadership, I really wanted to dive deep into what futurism really is and what are folks outside of academia, outside of the credit union, banking, financial services industry saying about where we're going in the future and what we as leaders need to think about at every single decision point that we're making. So I really sought out an organization where I could go through a rigorous course to become a certified futurist. And that's exactly what I did through the Futurist Institute. And what I loved about the certification that I have is I am a certified futurist and long-term analyst. Those are the fancy FLTA letters that I have after my name. And what I loved about this certification program was that there were, and they're online self-led courses in every possible area that we need to care about in the future, whether it's the future of energy, the future of banking, the future of education, the future of technology. It spans such a wide scope. So upon completing that and becoming a certified futurist, it just broadened my perspective even greater. And I feel like I'm able to bring more of that future thinking to not only my credit unions, but to help in advocacy of our industry. And literally every single month when I have my all-employee CEO Connect meetings, every single month I talk about the future of credit unions and what I want all of my employees to be thinking about every single day. And one of the biggest takeaways is how can we as an industry make sure that we future-proof? And part of future-proofing is understanding that we're in the people business. We're not in the money business. We're in the people business. And while we're a credit union and while we're a financial institution, we have to behave like a technology company. And we're seeing today more than ever, thinking about Apple's savings accounts, and all the things that we're seeing in the news. The tech companies are starting to act like financial institutions. And we have a lot of catching up to do for financial institutions.
And they've made it very easy as well. So it's
they sure have. So I think as an industry, we're doing a lot of really, really good things. What I'd love to see in our industry is even a higher level of collaboration, a higher level of cooperation amongst some of the biggest and the best to help some of the mid-sized and smaller credit unions. And, as a mid-sized credit union, we're approaching, 600 million in assets, certainly, barely mid-sized, by today's standards, of scale, is merging, is M&A really the answer to the future of our industry? Or is there a real need for small and mid-sized credit unions to still be those centers of the community? I don't think it's any surprise where I stand on that issue.
To most that listen will know I tend to agree with you. So that it's funny what you just said. It's like I served this up. We're recording this a little bit in advance. As I mentioned, this is episode 163. Tomorrow, actually, from the day we're recording this, episode 161 is coming out. And that was with Jill. Great. And it's on future-proofing credit unions. So what you just said.
And you know what? I promise she didn't call me to tell me about that.
We're connecting. We'll link back and forth to these episodes. When you were talking about that, it made me think of one of my favorite books that I've mentioned on this show before, and that's The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly. Have you read
I
that
haven't
before?
read that one.
Okay,
No.
you'd probably enjoy that one. It's a fascinating book. It's a little older now. I'm sure it still holds up, but some of the stuff has probably already come true.
Well, and I'm a huge reader. I'm about a book a week, reader or, truth be told, listener on Audible, because I have a little bit of a commute.
I am an Audible fan myself, so
that's fantastic. Sure. Well, since we're talking books, I have so many of them and we don't have time to talk about them. But one of the books that I just recently finished, I'm going to forget the author, but my new Chief Information and Technology Officer, Ray Reagan, actually referred this book to me, and it's called A Beautiful Constraint. And it's all about how can we turn constraints into opportunities. And it was just another one of those perfect books at the perfect time that I think while like you said, it's a couple years old now, we could all benefit from just turning limitations and constraints into opportunities.
I will have to put that in the Audible cart. Let me ask you a question about that. You mentioned, a member of your leadership team in the book recommendations. As far as, like you said, 14 months in, when you're looking at your leadership team, whether it's bringing in new folks or as you're coming in as a new CEO with some people that have been there a while, what are you looking for? I mean, somebody, I'm trying not to speak for you here, but as somebody who looks at the future, as somebody who, to me, sounds like you're a progressive credit union leader, what are you looking for as far as the people that surround you and round out your leadership team? Are there any traits that rise to the top for you?
Absolutely. So just in the last year, I had the privilege of building an entirely new leadership team. So 90% of my executive leadership team is new, myself included. And it isn't because I came in and cleaned house. It's because during the interim period, a lot of the previous executive leadership team members had self-selected out. So I just wanted to set the record straight there.
not the hatchet.
Exactly. However, when I look for the folks that I, really want to be my partners in leading the organization to the future, I want folks who are going to think differently, who are going to challenge how things have always been done, and who are going to be collaborative at every level. And I mentioned, a couple words, previously in our conversation. I really want to see a high level of humility, a high level of empathy, and the ability to collaborate and challenge and strategically listen while being a continuous learner. And I'm a true believer that for, anybody, whether they're in a leadership position or not, being a lifelong learner is one of the most important attributes to remaining relevant in anything that you do. So one of the words that I used as I was recruiting for our new executive team was I was looking for partners to help co-create the future Securityplus Federal Credit Union. And what I will share is that every single one of the candidates that we interviewed for any of the positions, every single one of them said, what attracted me to Securityplus in this position was your vision for the future and just how you positioned it. And I often think that when we're recruiting for top talent out there, we often look at a job description and we sort of regurgitate what that job description is in an ad. We're selling ourselves. We're selling what this opportunity is. And with the war for talent right now, it has to be a compelling reason for someone to join any team and to want to stay on that team. So I really want partners. I don't have all of the answers, and I make that very clear to my team. The other attribute is I don't want yes people. I want people who are comfortable challenging me. And believe me, I have a team that's comfortable challenging me, and it makes me better. And that's why we've been able to accelerate, the success that we have. And it's exciting. Not only do we have a group of top talent, in the credit union industry, they're good people and we're having a lot of fun together. But I also want diverse opinions and diverse backgrounds, because if we're all the same, what fun is that?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I have to ask the flip side of this. Is there, you're sitting there in the interview, they make it through the screening process, let's just say, and you're down to the final three. Is there something that's just an absolute no-go? Somebody says something and you're like, oh no, you're not going to work here.
Interesting question. I would say, the number one no-go for me, and this is sort of across the board, is ego. And I think, there's a fine line sometimes between ego and confidence. For those of us that sort of pride ourselves on that human connection, we have an instinct that kind of comes across. And we've all worked with folks who put ego, above everything else. And I often say, to folks, and I've said it in interviews, I expect everybody to check their ego at the door. In this room, we all have a voice. Now, as CEO, I also say everybody has a voice, but not everybody always has a vote.
That's right.
I retain my veto power, and I use it every once in a while. But the more buy-in you can get from everybody, the more everybody's going to be in the same boat, rowing in the same direction.
I wanted to have a question. You mentioned your, getting your bachelor's degree through the credit union and your MBA, and then obviously the certification with being a futurist. I love this question. What's the greatest investment that you've made in your career? And as an example, Warren Buffett says it was Dale Carnegie courses. So,
oh, wow.
Is there one that sticks out over others to you?
Oh, goodness. That is a great question. I'm going to give sort of a two-prong answer here. Number one, I definitely am a huge advocate of education of any kind. I don't think anybody can go wrong with formal, informal education. I certainly don't believe I would be in the CEO seat if I didn't have my bachelor's degree and my MBA. So formal education, absolutely. For me, the greatest benefit and what I really believe I learned the most from is almost on my own learning. I mentioned before, I read. I read every day. I spend a good hour of my morning while I'm enjoying my coffee every morning, reading, listening to whatever I can. The other industry item that I would 100% say was a valuable investment, and it's absolutely an investment, is CUI's CEO Institute.
They happen to be our sponsor.
Yeah. And ironically, again, yeah. I didn't know any of the questions, that you were going to ask me today in advance. But I will tell you, and I've said this directly to CUIs, in interviews as well. Earlier in my credit union leadership career, I would often look at the CUIs credentials as, oh, it's just a line on a resume that boards want to look at, when they're going through the recruiting process. And to some degrees that might be true, or to some degree that might be true. What I realized when I finally decided to pursue that, and I was, honored that my credit union at the time invested in me to send me to the 3 years of the CUI's CEO Institute. What I realized was the connections, the collaboration, and the learnings from those 3 institutes surprised me more than anything. I have built what I believe are probably career-long connections with other, very driven, very forward-thinking credit union leaders, some CEOs, some not CEOs, who are aspiring, CEOs. So right now, I'm encouraging some of my executive team to think about pursuing the CUI's CEO Institute, because while, I plan to be at Securityplus for, a very long time, I know my executive leadership team, they're driven, they have aspirations, and I'm not doing my job if I'm not investing in what they want their career to be. So it might sound like a little bit of a risk, but it's an investment.
Well, no, I mean, it's the future Tricia coaching tree, right? Like the CEO tree underneath. That's I think a true sign of success, right? So
thank you. I like that.
One question on this that I did want to make sure that I got to before we start moving down the show here was, and it's kind of going back to the future proofing. I think across the board, pre the pandemic, most credit union folks thought things like remote work just couldn't exist. What do you think a career in, you mentioned your child is 15 years old. If it's 10 years from that point, what does a career in credit unions look like as far as you're concerned in the future?
Oh, I love this question. So, right now, I think we are all thinking digital first. However, we all have to realize that humans are always going to exist. So we have to keep humans at the center of that. My philosophy with the future of work is that we need to provide flexibility, and we need to have a flexible work environment so that we can meet employees where they are, so that we can make sure that we can get the best talent. That might mean that we have a balance of our workforce who is on site, whether it's on site in an operations center, headquarters, or whether it's on site in various types and sizes of branches. It also means that we could have a workforce that's fully remote across the country, across the world, so that we can have the best talent. Like you right now, you're working in Africa. When I worked for a technology company, I was on pretty much a 24-hour schedule because we had employees all across the globe, and we needed to balance that. In credit unions, we haven't really worked in that type of an environment unless you're working with vendors, partners, contractors who are, truly across the world.
We got rid of our office 8 years ago at CUInsight, and everybody's been fully remote. So it's
that's fantastic.
That wouldn't work for everybody, right? So you're
absolutely right.
In a couple of weeks, we're all meeting up in Greenville just to have the human connection still, not just all Zoom and Slack and everything else. So
I love that. Well, and you know what? I think what's so beautiful about that type of environment is that you can really be so cost effective with working remotely, getting rid of your headquarters, but then your in-person interaction is very intentional.
Absolutely.
And, it's so much, I think, much more powerful when you all come together, because then you realize, that working remotely is great because it balances work and life, and you can do your laundry, while you're, doing what you need to do for work, or, break away, get a half an hour of sun, out on your deck. Yet at the same time, coming together is, it's just a beautiful thing. It's so much more valuable.
You have to do it. I have a feeling that we could talk for hours, and I want to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time as well. So before I move on to the more rapid fire questions, was there anything that you were hoping that I would ask you today that I haven't?
Oh my goodness. Great question. So, I don't think that there's anything that you didn't ask me, because I really wanted to talk about, what the future of the industry, the future of kind of taking care of our members, taking care of our employees is all about. I always want to make sure that in any, podcast or interview that I do, that the one takeaway that everybody has is, if there's any doubt in your mind that you can't possibly do something, change that mindset right away. You can do anything you put your mind to. It just, might take a little bit of initiative, ingenuity, research, partnership, relationships. But the future of our industry is bright, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Absolutely. Okay. Now we're going to have a little fun with the rapid fire questions. So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience without them. Remember, the questions are rapid, but your answers, they don't have to be. So what was the first job you ever had? The high school job or whatever it happened to be?
I was a lifeguard at our neighborhood pool.
There you go. There have been multiple lifeguards that said that. So,
interesting.
When was the last time, either personally or professionally, you were amazed?
Oh my goodness gracious. So I'm going to shoot from the hip here. It's going to be personal. So I am always amazed at my son, Jack, who is going to be 15 in August. He maybe about 5 years ago, discovered his love for flying.
Oh, wow.
Yes, flying. So he has a very clear career trajectory to become a pilot.
Oh, that's fantastic.
He has a full flight simulator in his room. And he took his first flight lesson a year ago this month.
That is amazing.
And because he turns 15 in August, he's officially going to register to get his pilot's license by the time he turns 16. So
that is amazing. I can see why you're amazed by that.
He amazes me.
Well, I can't wait until Captain Jack is flying my Delta flight next time. So
yes, exactly. Well, and it's funny that you said that because he, and again, I could talk for hours about Jack, and I won't, I promise. But he's a very cerebral kid. He's super smart. His mind is always going a million miles an hour, just like mine. But he's not your traditional, I love school, kind of kid. And I said to him, school isn't for everybody, and that's okay. I didn't like school either, when I was your age. So the fact that, he's only 14 and he has a really good,
that's pretty cool.
Exactly. So I'm just constantly in awe of him because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was his age.
All right. This is a question that I've been asking on the show now for about a year, but you may be the person I'm most excited to ask this to after this conversation. So
no pressure.
Just because of your constant learning. What are you currently working on about Tricia? What's taking up that personal growth space?
Oh, great question. And my voice just went down a little bit on that. So what I'm working on myself right now is balance.
You're leading into my next question. Amazing.
Oh, and again, I didn't even know these questions. So I think instinctually, I'm always taking care of everybody else. And I love that. It's what I want to do. And I take that responsibility very seriously, not just within my family, but when I, have the responsibility of leading a team or now leading a credit union, I have just under 90 employees, every single one of their families, and anybody that depends on them counting on me. I have 35,000 members, their families, and everybody who counts on them counting on me. And I take that very seriously, and I think about it every single day. And what I realize is, despite what I may have thought earlier in my life, I am not Wonder Woman. I cannot do it all. And I need to take time for myself to balance work and life. And just in the last month or so, it's been my cup runneth over, meaning I'm a sandwich generation. I have a young son and I have parents that are in the state right next to me, but my parents are in Pennsylvania. I'm in Maryland. And, they're both getting older and they need help and support. So, in the last year, my mom's health declined. We had to move her into a nursing home. My father had an accident with a spinal cord injury.
Oh, geez.
He's okay. So balancing, parent needs, family needs, and work needs. I'm very, very lucky to have a support system that when these things do happen, life doesn't implode. And one of the things I said earlier in our conversation is we're all human. And as CEOs, as leaders, we need to create space for others to be able to take care of what they need to take care of when they need to take care of it. That's my world right now.
I'd love to dig into this a little bit more. Have you come up with any hacks? Because, you've mentioned your son and your husband and the parents as well, right? And then there's the credit union to making sure that, I like to use the analogy that we have these different buckets, but you can't fill them over the top, right? You can't put one to the other. So anything that you've come up with that when you realize maybe you're running a little bit too hard to take a step back, or is there something you do as a daily routine that kind of gives you that space?
I do. And thank you for asking, because it's something, number one, that I'm not often asked, but a few things have been game changers for me. So while early on when I started doing this, I had a tremendous amount of guilt about it. I started really time blocking my calendar. So when I know that I need to give myself time, whether it's to just do work that I know I need to do and that can't be scheduled, I will put blocks on my calendar so that I know I can focus, or I know I can take a call, I'm expecting. I also empower my teams to do that very same thing. Something that I used in my previous credit union that we're starting to employ at SecurityPlus is no meeting Fridays. And while it doesn't always work that way, and we don't ever say anything is really mandatory, but we try to encourage folks to not schedule a lot of meetings, whether it's in person or virtual, on Fridays, just to let everybody have a little bit of a catch-up day, or a day that they can disconnect, early if they need to. And they're simple things, but they're things that really make a world of difference when you're trying to balance so many competing priorities.
Which we all have, like you mentioned.
We all have, right. And another thing that I have used, religiously for many, many, many years is, there hasn't been a time that I haven't had at least a 45-minute commute when I do go into the office, probably for the last 15 years. So I use my commute time to and from anytime I'm in the car to schedule calls. I'll jump on a meeting virtually while I'm in my car, audio only, of course, or just make calls. So I try to use every single minute I possibly can as wisely as I can. I also have times at night where I will completely disconnect, so when I'm home, I want to be present, with my husband and my son, and I'll leave my phone in another room and I won't have my Apple Watch on, so it won't buzz when something happens.
Notifications, right? No,
exactly.
Leo Ordine was on the podcast years ago. He's been on twice, and he gave the hack of turning off notifications on your phone. And I did that, and it cracks Jill up to this day, because at some point I did a block and I only have about 3 hours that I get notifications now. So I have no idea how, but I like it. So
it's a life changer. I turned notifications off years ago, except on a couple things. And
right. That's exactly
you're
it.
right.
Yeah. Everything else, don't need the pop-ups.
Yeah, you're distracted. And I read an article not too long ago. I think it was an HBR article, and it was about, sort of time management is dead. Now it's all about attention management. Yeah. And that's what turning off notifications is all about.
Absolutely. Okay. 2 last questions. They're both just fun ones. What's the greatest album of all time?
Oh my goodness. It has to be a Led Zeppelin album.
Oh, there you go.
No. I'm going to say Pink Floyd, The Wall.
No, that's a good one.
Although I have to say, my husband and I talk about this all the time, because my husband is a big Porsche guy, and he lets me drive his cars every once in a while. But one of my favorite driving songs is Joe Walsh, Rocky Mountain Way. And whenever it comes on, I always look at my husband and I say, the first thing I think when I hear this song is, okay, downshift and go. And he's like, and that's why I always get nervous when you drive my car.
That's awesome. I love that story. The last one, this came from NCUA Chairman Harper. Who plays you in the movie biopic of your life?
Wow, I did not see that one coming.
You thought it was going to be some regulation question or something. It's not.
Ooh,
He's a regular listener of the show. So he was like, I'd love if you would ask this. I'm like, I think it's fantastic.
I love it. Well, 2 people come to mind right away, and I don't know which way I'm going to go here. So I'm just going to leave it up to you and everybody else. I'm going to say either Sandra Bullock or Jennifer Aniston.
There you go. Those are 2 great choices.
That's right. And I love that they're passionate and they're serious and they do good things, but they're funny and they don't take themselves too seriously.
Which is important for all of us to remember, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. The last question that I have for you is a couple things. Any final thoughts you'd like to share before we go? And we'll link to it in the show notes, but what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? What's your poison? Email, LinkedIn? How should people connect if they have more questions? Because I'm sure they will.
Absolutely. I always welcome anybody to reach out to me via email or my LinkedIn anytime. Please feel free to publish both. And just sort of, final thoughts, something that has become a little bit of a personal mantra for me and something that we're incorporating into our business strategy. But I'll really encourage everybody to think infinitely and act purposefully. And it's something that I, have really taken, seriously over the last few years and realize it's what drives me. I want to make sure that we're always thinking as long-term as we possibly can. And as an industry, I want to make sure that we're preserving and protecting all things credit union for many, many generations to come. And we have to act really purposefully to get there.
Well, I think you also just gave us the title for this show, so I appreciate that.
I love it.
So there you go. Tricia, thank you so much for being here today. I greatly appreciate it, and this has been a ton of fun. I hope our paths cross soon in person, actually. So
I do as well. Randy, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I have so enjoyed our conversation.
A few things before we go. Make sure again to check out CUIs, not only TalentNEXT, but at the CEO Institute that we talked about on the show today. You can find out everything about CUIs at CUIs.org. They are a longtime partner of CUInsight.com and the podcast, and I am grateful for their support to allow me to have this much fun doing what I do. Also, you can subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all. And if you're looking for one of the books we mentioned, and I'll throw in another one that I was going to say, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. I just re-listened to it. It's amazing. A quick Google search of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list and your next read is on its way from Amazon, or do what Tricia and I do and download it on Audible. But last but certainly not least, thank you all for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate all of you. Be well, friends.